Organized religion has a bad reputation in the modern world. Although those of us who are working on the inside might question how appropriate the adjective organized really is, a growing number of people call themselves spiritual but not religious, which evidently means some sort of vague commitment to recognizing that there is a God and maybe some sort of prayer or meditation that's connected to that somehow. Well, we know that pursuing God on your own, is doomed. For God did not call persons to him, but a people. When the great prophet Elijah felt like he was the last one, like he was alone, he despaired. For without a people of God to minister to, what was he? This going it solo attitude, this not belonging to anything, this trend, does raise an important question though. What is true religion? What would religion look like that is worthy of joining and being a part of? It is this question that James answers in our text today, the last two verses of chapter 1. So let us look at James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. We'll start with verse 26. It says this: "If anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself, and his religion is worthless." So what does it take to be religious? Is saying that you are religious enough? Or is there some sort of objective standard that we could apply to know if someone is or isn't? Religion is not a topic that the New Testament delves into very much. It does spend a lot of time talking about being a disciple of Jesus Christ and what that entails, what that requires, but religion in general is not a common topic. In fact, the Greek word here, thraskos, which is the adjective translated religious, occurs only this one time in the whole of the New Testament. The word religious, only once. The corresponding noun, threskeia, which is religion, occurs only 4 times. And 2 of them are right here in verses 26 and 27. So the term, the word, the idea of religion is not really very common in the New Testament. Postmodernism, the era that we live in, speaks of religion in a generic sense, usually, as if they are all more or less interchangeably the same. But the Bible never does that. It makes it very clear that all of mankind's various attempts, and there have been a lot of different attempts, to approach God on our own are all in vain. Only by grace through faith and only in Jesus can we have religion that matters. James in these verses is not talking generically about religion, for all of his readers are connected to the Old Covenant because they're all Jewish, they're all Jews. And they're also connected to the New Covenant because they're all followers of Jesus Christ. So as Jewish Christians then, how do they know that their practice of their faith, their religion, is legitimate? And by extension, how do we know that what we do here as a church is pleasing to God? So before contemplating the purity of our collective religion, of what we do here together, James first explores the validity of individuals who claim to be a part of it. In John's first letter, the first letter of the Apostle John, he outlines 3 tests of a genuine Christian. If you read 1 John, you'll notice these 3 themes predominate. Number 1, you must acknowledge that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Secondly, you need to love your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. And thirdly, you need to obey the commands of God. James isn't trying to be quite so thorough here and say, okay, here are all of the tests. He's merely offering for us one indicator that is fairly easy to see or not see in someone who claims to be religious. And that is this: control of your own tongue. Somebody who claims to be religious might do all manner of things that seem to indicate that he or she is really religious. and they might refrain from certain actions, certain behaviors that seem to indicate a religious life. James cuts through all of that surface level clutter to arrive at a matter which reflects the heart, the words that come out of our mouths. So what then does it mean to keep a tight rein on your tongue, as James says here? We already had the commands back in verse 19 that we ought to be slow to speak and quick to listen. And we saw how that was connected to controlling our anger. This is related to that, for angry words, of course, are certainly not an indicator of religion. At least they shouldn't be, when those two things are connected. Like in the unfortunately named, and this is an unfortunate name, Westboro Baptist Church, and their angry, crude protests that they've been famous for the last 10 years or so. When we see that, we all cringe, because our gut tells us strongly that such vitriol and such anger does not go with the gospel of Jesus Christ. They don't belong together. We can see that, we feel it. So beyond avoiding words spoken in anger, what else do we need to do in our speech to avoid losing control of our tongue? There is, of course, the old adage that your mother probably said to you, especially if you had siblings: if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. I know you know that one, and you've probably all heard that, and as a mother or father, you probably said that a few times, whether or not you were heated. We have no business as Christians using what we say to belittle and tear down other people. It doesn't really matter what our motives, what is causing us to resort to hateful and hurtful speech. But when we do, we have failed to live up to the high standard of Christ. In addition, we should also have nothing to do with spreading falsehoods, with untruths that encourage the darkness and not the light. Now, James will return to the topic of controlling our speech in chapter 3, and we'll probably have at least one, maybe two messages on that. So I don't want to elaborate too much on that topic here. It will suffice to say that a person whose mouth is out of control can hardly claim any special connection to religion, let alone making a legitimate claim to being a disciple of Jesus Christ. If our mouth is out of control, that's not a good sign. Verse 27 is the heart of what we're going to focus in on here today. We'll take it in two parts. The first part says this: religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. We'll begin with that first phrase: religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless. We're about to see two ways in which our collective exercise of our faith as a church, whether we're talking locally here in this place, or as our denomination, or the church universal all over the world, can be judged for its effectiveness. By making the judge, as James does, God our Father, he is making it clear that this is not a standard to be applied to any and all religions, only those under the covenant of the God of Abraham. Before James's day, that was the people of Israel. Now, from there to here, it is the spiritual descendants of Abraham, the followers of Jesus Christ. So for us, as God our Father, as our judge, what is pure and faultless? The standard we are aiming for, notice, pure and faultless. That sounds like a lofty goal. That sounds pretty high. When Jesus confronted the religious leadership of his day, he did so pretty harshly, in large part because they failed miserably on both of the things that James is talking about. Likewise, the Old Testament prophets again and again confronted the people of Israel with their failures to obey the covenant. We read Isaiah this morning, his expression of how frustrated God was with their failures. The prophets often citing one or both of these things that James is going to talk about. In other words, what we're talking about here today is nothing new for the church. It is the standard that the prophets of old used to warn of God's impending wrath. It is the same standard that Jesus brought against the leadership of his day, the same religious leaders that plotted to take his life. So it is that same standard, and it begins with, number one, this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. So how do you judge the moral quality of a society? The easiest way is to observe how it treats the weakest and the least fortunate. That will tell you an awful lot about the moral quality of any society, whether currently or in history. How does it treat those who cannot defend themselves, the weak, the innocent? The same can rightly be asked of the church. Widows and orphans in the first century were the most vulnerable segments of their society. They had little or no governmental institutions in the Roman Empire to help widows and orphans. It fell to family. Well, by definition, widows and orphans are lacking in family to help them. So it was left to those motivated by religious charity to help them. For the early church, this is a significant challenge. The majority of Christians in the first 2 centuries of the church were poor. Many of them were slaves, which meant they owned nothing. And many of the remainder were women, far more women than men. They themselves thus had limited resources. The church was not at all wealthy in the first 2 centuries. To care for widows and orphans would be a major undertaking. Later on, when the church had significant material possessions to its name, the church began to found things like orphanages and hospitals and schools, among other charitable enterprises to help those in need. But during James's lifetime, and for several generations to follow James, this task that he is setting before them is a particularly significant one. To pass it for them would mean a large and ongoing commitment of their actually very scarce resources. To take care of widows and orphans was a big deal. But relative to their poverty as a church 2,000 years ago, we in the modern world are profoundly wealthy. You may not always feel like it, but if you compare your situation to theirs, you certainly are. Especially here in the West. And relative to the paltry help offered by the Roman Empire, our government is doing a lot of work that would centuries ago have fallen only on the church. Our task is thus, here and now, much easier to lift. Our effort required to fulfill this command from James much less. Should not then the expectations for the modern church be correspondingly very high? Looking at the church globally, and I'm going to start globally and work down to locally, the church globally, universally, whatever you want to call it, has the church invested significantly in helping the most vulnerable in its midst, let alone those outside of our community? Well, thinking of the church globally, we do have countless food pantries and homeless shelters and hospitals and schools and all the like that are run by the church in all of its forms, as well as significant disaster relief projects and attempts to alleviate the extreme poverty of the third world. Overall, as a whole, the church is doing something, quite a few things. Effort is being made. The question then becomes, is it enough? Are we as a church as a whole doing enough? Smaller segment. On the denominational level, the American Baptist churches, and FYI, if you forgot, that's what we are. American Baptist churches are involved in those same efforts. We have several special offerings that you may have noticed every year to support those efforts. They include One Great Hour of Sharing, America for Christ, the World Mission Offering, and the Retired Ministers and Missionaries Offering. This past week, a week ago Friday, I was in Breezewood for an annual meeting of the American Baptist Churches of Pennsylvania and Delaware, which is our region within American Baptist Churches USA. At that meeting, we were discussing denominational efforts, among other things, to help those in need. Our denomination, ABC, is doing many things in this front. Is it enough? What about on the local level? What about the churches in our area and what we are doing to help the modern equivalent of widows and orphans? We have been blessed in our county with multiple food pantries supported by groups of churches each. We have multiple clothing pantries, and here in Franklin we have something called the Central Help Fund to help people. In recent years we've added to that effort with Mustard Seed Missions, which I know you've heard about, which has helped over 500 families in 3 years. And now we're working to bring a homeless shelter from the category of need to reality. All of this work requires cooperation between churches across denominational lines. I have been encouraged, very seriously, I mean this when I say it, time and time again I have been encouraged and uplifted to have that cooperation. When we moved here at the start of 2012, it was obvious that there was an ecumenical spirit here in this county amongst God's people, and it has only grown in the last 4 years. It is a gift that we have, a gift that we have been blessed with, one that many communities, frankly, are struggling in their attempts to fulfill God's kingdom purpose without having that spirit of cooperation, without being able to work with churches of other denominations. It is much harder to do this, and they struggle because they don't have that. So all the men and women of God who helped pave the way in our community, that we might have a cooperative spirit between our churches, deserve our gratitude. And believe me, for me, they have it. It makes my job so much easier. We have much to be thankful for and proud of regarding the efforts on the part of the churches locally to help those in need. Are we doing enough? Lastly, here in our local church, we have ongoing efforts to help those in need. And let me say off the bat, if I forget something or something is not covered, it is not personal. There are a lot of things in this list that came to my mind, and there are always more. First off, we have a fellowship offering on Communion Sunday. The Diaconate Board uses that to help people that attend this church privately during their times of need. In addition, through our missions budget, we help support Mustard Seed Missions, Awana by supporting the Fullers, the ABC Life Center, Child Evangelism Fellowship, Community Services, the St. John Foods Pantry, the Salvation Army, Venango Youth for Christ, and that Central Help Fund. And of course, our ABC ladies have for years done charitable projects, for decades really. Our church is blessed also with a large building, if you haven't noticed. Something that enables us to have space here to allow AA to have meetings, celebrate recovery, the food voucher distributions for the twice a year, the monthly meeting of the County Human Service caseworkers. I'm very glad that we have that. 160 of them meet over here every month to have their staff meeting. Along with meetings for Mustard Seed Mission, that's every month in Latchaw. The homeless shelter meets every month in Latchaw. The Girl Scouts meet here. The Focus on Our Future Collaborative Board meets here. All of these groups and more use our facility. Now I list all of these things, all of these programs, all of these efforts, some of which you may be familiar with, some of which you probably heard of for the very first time today, not to brag on ourselves, but to give us the proper perspective that we need in order to honestly ask ourselves the question, are we doing enough as a local church to help those in need? In order that our practice of our faith might be considered pure and faultless. Are we doing enough? You won't be able to answer that if you don't know what we're doing. Now, there will always be debates, and these are very necessary, about what our top priority must be, how we organize our priorities, what is first, what's second, what's third. And we also will debate the methods that we use to try to help people. What is actually the most effective thing in helping this group of people and that kind of person? so that we can actually truly help them when we try. Those conversations based on our experience and on wisdom are invaluable. They are very necessary. But that's not really what we're talking about here today. Our focus here is less on the how to help people and more on the want to help people. If we as a universal church, as a denomination, as a group of local churches, and as an individual church, if we want to help those in need, and I mean seriously, sustained ways, we really do want to help them, we will be effective tools in the hands of our Heavenly Father. God will make that happen. We can always talk about priorities. We can always talk about procedures. But if our heart is not broken for those around us and those around the globe that are in dire material need, if our heart does not bleed for them, how will we ever demonstrate the love of Christ to them? Once God has our heart, once God has the heart of His church beating according to His love, according to His mercy, He can give that church wisdom, the wisdom it needs to be effective in carrying out those acts of love. How then are we doing? We could be doing more. Probably in many ways we could, and many levels we could be doing more. We could be doing more effectively. But there are encouraging signs that God's people have heard the call to Christian charity. Let us then as a local church commit to doing our part, to utilizing the human and material resources we have been given, along with a generous portion of the Holy Spirit, to make a difference in the lives of the people that God is placing in our path. So after all of that, hopefully you're saying, so what about me? The church is doing things, and the worldwide church, all the way down to this local church, they're all doing things. But where do I fit in? How do I do my part? I'm glad you asked. At least I said that you asked, because that's what we're going to talk about next, and this is the most important part. Because there are a variety of ways, some of which are exceedingly simple and you might not even think about, in which you can be involved and support our collective effort, our group effort, to fulfill our mission for God's kingdom. And let me just give you the top 5 or 6 of them that came to my mind. Some of them are exceedingly simple, and you may have already done them or be doing them and don't even know it yet. First off, number 1, become a member if you aren't one already. We've added, and we are in the process of adding 4 members today. Most of the rest of you here today are members, but some of you are not. In our church, members are the ones that have the right to vote on all the important decisions this church makes, including the ways in which we use our resources to help the poor. So in order to have a voice, you need to be a member. Secondly, you could serve at some point as a board member. We have 10 positions on our 2 boards, and these are the people making the month-to-month decisions on behalf of the congregation as a whole about how we implement our budget, how we implement our policies and try to help people. Thirdly, you could earmark some of your offering to support the missions budget. All of our assistance to those in need outside of our church, the people outside of the people that come here, all of that is funneled through the missions budget. Fourthly, you could contribute to the fellowship offering. Once a month we have envelopes in the bulletin for the fellowship fund. All of the assistance that we give to people inside the church, within our congregation, comes from that fund and is managed by the diaconate board. Fifth, you could volunteer. Volunteer here. Volunteer at ABC Life Center. Volunteer with Mustard Seeds. Volunteer down at the St. John's Food Pantry. I don't care one bit where you volunteer. Doesn't matter to me at all, as long as you're doing it. We currently, I know, have people that are volunteering regularly with Mustard Seed Missions, down at ABC, with Youth for Christ, with Awana, and a bunch of other places. The greatest need for most of these organizations is not, nor ever is it, money. Their greatest need is almost always loving and kind volunteers who will be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ and do the work that is necessary. Sixth thing you could do, volunteer. Wait a minute, I said that one already. I did that on purpose. I wanted to make sure you paid attention when I said volunteer. There are other ways, but those are the ones that come to mind. How you can get involved in what we are doing. But that's not all there is to it. In addition to all of the ways in which you can be a part of our collective effort, our church effort, to help those in need, there will also be opportunities for you, as in the parable of the Good Samaritan. You will find yourself in an opportunity to help someone in need, someone that God brings into your life. That might be a family member, it might be a neighbor, it might be literally a stranger that you meet on the side of the road. It might require you give some financial assistance. It more likely and more importantly will require you to invest some time, some effort, some care and compassion in that person. In the end, whether we're talking about the church as a whole, all around the world, or our local church, or you as an individual Christian, we must demonstrate through consistent and concrete actions our complete commitment to imitating the kindness and mercy of God by helping in whatever way we can those in need. This is not an optional part of Christianity. This is not special Christianity. This is not A-plus Christianity. It is the heart of our faith. It is not simply something that we do. It must be who we are. Then and only then will our Christian faith measure up to God's standard, and only then will it be judged pure and faultless. That's the first test. We've got one more. 27b says, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. The first test of true religion was its ability to inspire us to acts of kindness toward other people. It was an outward focus, things that we do outwardly. This second test is an inward focus, not allowing the pollution of the world to control us. To call this world that we live in polluted is not an ecological statement, but a moral one. It's not air or water pollution that your faith must protect you from, and because it's not going to. Air and water pollution, you're not going to overcome that by faith. It's not the way it works. It is instead the moral pollution of human rebellion against God, which is manifested in all manner of wickedness and vice that you need to be free from. The planet is suffering from physical pollution. We know that. It wasn't that long ago that the rivers coming into Lake Erie were on fire back in my early days. We have seen pollution, and that is something that we should care about, but that's not what is. We have, I'm trying to say this the right way. Physical pollution is a serious threat. But moral pollution is drowning our planet. They are not nearly the same threat level. That's not me being a pessimist. You know I'm not a pessimist, I'm an optimist. But rather that is me simply being realistic and recognizing the danger that exists of being morally corrupted by the society that you live in. It doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter when you live, you are in danger of being corrupted by society. James lived in a very different culture, in a very different time and place than what we do. His readers faced moral challenges from Roman society that you and I wouldn't even understand. The reverse is also true. The challenges we face today, in many ways, would be incomprehensible to them. However, one thing remains the same down through the centuries, and that is fallen human nature. Humanity has changed very little since the first century. The same sins that ensnared our ancestors in the faith confront us today. The form taken by temptation may have changed. Back then, they had temple prostitutes to worry about to tempt their lust. Today, we have internet porn. They're very different, but lust is lust. Greed is greed. Hatred is still killing the innocent. Nothing about human nature has changed in 2,000 years. The question then is this: how do we keep ourselves individually, how do we keep ourselves as a church from becoming enmeshed in the sin that permeates this society and every society? Now, it isn't by withdrawing and hiding from the world like some sort of hermit. While that may have some limited value in keeping you from sin, we learn back in verses 13 to 15 that temptation comes from within us, not from the outside. We can never hide from temptation entirely because we take it with us. We will be tempted as long as our heart is yearning to sin. In addition to being insufficient to eliminate sin, hiding from the world would greatly complicate the thing that we just learned we need to do, which is help those in need. How can you help those in need if you're hiding in a cabin in the mountains? Makes it more difficult. There are some activities and situations which we can clearly say everybody needs to avoid. Each and every one of us, they are sinful situations. Stay away. But most of the situations we face in life are morally neutral until the person or the people involved in them put a righteous or a wicked purpose behind it. For example, your job. Unless you are a drug dealer, which would be an exception to this rule, your job is pretty much morally neutral. It could be used to serve the kingdom of God through hard work and honesty, or it can be used to serve sinful purposes through laziness or dishonesty or greed. Your job is just a job. What you do with it determines whether or not it is righteous. Whether or not we are polluted by the world depends a great deal on our own attitude, on our actions. If we seek righteousness, the temptations of this world will, like water off a duck's back, fall right off us. If we open instead the door to wickedness, we'll soak up this world's pollution like a sponge. The best and most consistent way to avoid the pollution of sin is thus to fill our lives with righteousness instead. If we are already devoting our time, our energy, our resources into doing what is noble, what is right, what is just, and what is good, where will we even find the energy to listen to our heart's murmur about temptation? Don't even give it a chance. This is a self-reinforcing cycle. The more we give to God of ourselves to become Christ-like, the less the siren's call of sin is going to tug at our ears. Over time, these righteous choices will become righteous habits. And we all know that habits are hard to break, so wouldn't we be better off filling our lives with good ones? In conclusion, if our faith, our own faith, and our collective faith as a church is going to have the impact on this world that we know that it needs to have, we need to begin by making a commitment to treat our religion like it's who we are, not just something we do from time to time. We need to take it seriously, all of us. We need to take seriously our responsibility to help those in need, whoever they happen to be. And we need to utilize the desire that the Holy Spirit has to fill our lives with righteousness and leave no room for the pollution of this world. This is our calling. This is our mission. And when we at this church and others at their churches are fulfilling that mission, then God's power will change our world through us.